Okay, hello and welcome everybody. I'm here today with my good friend, Dr. Arlene Taylor, the brain specialist and health enthusiast and general all-around positive force in the universe. And we have a really important topic to talk with you about today. And as always, we're going to start. She's famous for her little brain exercises and brain games. So Dr. Arlene is going to do one with me. So if you will allow everyone, here we go. Can you see that on the screen, Dr. Arlene?
Not yet. I just see a brain bender and a blank screen.
All right, so here we go. You walk me through. Here's the very first thing we've got here.
All right, what is that?
Well, Dr. Arlene, that looks an awful lot like a gas can, which
I think you and I are on the same page.
we're on the same page. And so are we talking about the economy and inflation today?
I'm not, are you?
I don't think so. All right, let's get the second part of this brain bender. All right, we have this very handsome military officer in uniform saluting. So maybe that's, what do you say? Yes, sir. So I'm thinking we have a can plus sir. Is our topic today cancer?
Well, I think that's part of it.
I think that's part of it. Well, what happens when we throw gasoline on things?
Inflammation.
Inflammation, there it is, that dreaded inflammation, the source of all evil. So
well,
today,
I think it's really important for people to understand that so much of what we call illness, chronic diseases is underpinned with inflammation, and people don't seem to make that connection.
yes.
And if they can, it's huge in terms of health.
Huge in terms of health. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're here to talk about Ion Thrive, hydrogen water, that inflammation link, and cancer. So here we go. My beautiful friend, I can see your face on screen.
Good.
Awesome. Okay, so what I wanted to ask her first is I want to talk to her about, there's some WHO statistics on inflammation and disease. So if you could just take a moment and educate us a little bit about just what you were talking about, inflammation and that connection to disease.
Well, the World Health Organization does studies all over the world. And then they compile those and come up with estimates. Somebody said to me the other day, well, do they count every single person? Well, they do it the way we do most everything else. You do a huge sample size sampling, and then you say, well, estimates are. Well, there's some things that are pretty clear.
Right.
For example, chronic diseases are the leading cause of death worldwide, period. All right, so now we're looking at chronic diseases, but over half of all deaths are attributable to inflammation-related diseases, which is almost synonymous with chronic diseases. The estimates by WHO are that 3 of every 5 people die of an illness or disease linked with inflammation.
Wow.
Now we go to obesity. Obesity is now believed to be a global pandemic. Chronic inflammation can result in weight gain, which leads to obesity, which has been linked to more than 50 chronic diseases, most of which have inflammation as the underlying factor. That's very scary for me.
Right.
Because it's preventable, at least to some degree, in almost everything. So the latest statistics I could find was 2020, an estimated of 19.3 million new cancer cases.
Wow.
And to put that in some kind of perspective, that would be everybody in the city of Beijing, China. And that same year, there were approximately 10 million cancer deaths globally. And that would be the entire equivalent of the population in Bangkok, Thailand.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking huge, huge numbers. And unfortunately, estimates are that 1 in every 3 Americans will experience some type of cancer in his or her life. And I'm in that group because as a child, we didn't know anything about sunscreen, literally. You know, I grew up in the late 1800s. Come on,
Right.
Wendy.
Right.
And I lived
You and
in
Moses
Canada.
were roommates.
I lived in Canada, and you know, we had relatively short, hot summers, and we were always so glad to run out and play. And I got sunburned many times. And so I think I've had 4 invasive basal cell carcinomas removed from my face simply because of that sun damage.
Right.
That's not the only thing that can cause it, but I'm very careful now to stay out of the sun.
Right. Well, and you know, as with all things, when we learn, we can do better. What we didn't know, what we didn't know. But as we learn, as we have new information, and as scientific studies and life experience teaches us, it gives us a chance to make better decisions. So you make better decisions about the sun now.
Well, but that's the whole thing. Life is simply a compilation of all these little decisions that we make every single day.
Right.
Good, average, poor, horrible. And when you pull them together over time, that's what leads us to a healthier retirement or an unhealthy retirement,
right,
and an early death.
Absolutely. You know, I was shocked when you said that number, that 3 out of 5 people die of a disease linked to inflammation. That's a shocking number. And so I want us to be able to talk about inflammation, because, you know, they sell just over the counter Advil and naproxen sodium. They sell anti-inflammatories that people pop almost like candy. So the whole market is flooded with anti-inflammation. So can you give us a rundown a little bit about inflammation? Is all inflammation bad? I mean, the body creates it for a reason. So sometimes it's there with a good intention. Give us a little bit more education on inflammation.
Well, yes, the market's flooded with anti-inflammatories because people are complaining of, you know, gas bubbling up from their stomach and whatever all. But every medication has a downside.
Right.
And the problem is that, in my brain's opinion, most of the anti-inflammatories temporarily dampen down the symptoms, but they do nothing with the underlying inflammation. So you got to keep popping that stuff all the time. And I don't think that's healthy. So inflammation is very interesting, because I'm sure you've heard the old story about the twins, the good twin and the bad twin. Well, think of inflammation as having a good twin and a bad twin, right, meaning that inflammation itself, acute inflammation, is vitally important for helping us to heal through the immune system. So you cut yourself with a knife. Now, this I find really interesting. If you cut yourself with the knife, the body immediately recognizes that as an injury, and it will literally release chemicals that say to the immune system, help, I need your help.
Right.
We're injured here. And I didn't even realize about that till I got some updated studies on the immune system. So the injury itself releases chemicals that says, come and help me. So the immune system immediately responds by rushing white blood cells to that damaged tissue, wherever it is.
Right.
And one of their jobs is to trigger cells to divide and multiply so that they can regrow healthy tissue that you have to have in order to repair the injury, which I think is just, you know, science fiction. It's so amazing. In the process, because all these white blood cells are rushing there, you get what's called inflammation, meaning it swells because of the influx of white blood cells. It gets red around the wound. It feels hot sometimes, right, and you have pain because the cells are working at top speed to heal the injury. Now, if everything goes well, give yourself a week or 2.
Right.
The immune system has completed its job. It shuts itself down, and voila, your cut is healed. And sometimes even without a scar.
Yeah.
That's the good twin,
That's
if
the
you
good
want to
twin.
use that metaphor.
Absolutely. So then what happens? What happens when that all those signals don't shut down?
We're just learning that acute inflammation, if it doesn't shut down, can turn into chronic inflammation, but nobody knows exactly the reason that sometimes it shuts down and sometimes it doesn't. My guess would be that it would partly depend on the health of the rest of the body, but we don't have research to prove that yet. Sometimes nothing can be identified.
Right.
But
So
it can also, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so when that happens, you know, it's something like we said, it started out as a good response. When it's done, you know, when it continues and when it continues over a long period of time, that's when we get into that chronic situation, correct?
Well, that's the way you did the brain bender. When it continues, think everything's in flames, because
Right.
that's chronic inflammation. It can recur if you have lots of infections repeatedly. I had a secretary once who had irritable bowel syndrome, and she was always having problems, and they kept plying her with antibiotics, but over and over and over again, it would flare up like
Right.
the cigarette that was dropped in the forest and nobody stamped it out, and eventually it began to create a fire. Sometimes it's related to obesity, because obesity, as I mentioned earlier, is related to more than 50 different diseases, most of which are chronic.
Right.
Some families actually have a genetic propensity toward, not toward inflammation per se,
Right.
but toward a lifestyle that promotes inflammation. And if they don't know any better, as you said before, you only know what you know.
You only know what you know.
And that can increase the chronic inflammation. And then the chronic inflammation, think of those flames spreading, it can actually cause the immune system to attack other healthy body cells.
Yeah.
Which is just so deadly. And you probably already know classic symptoms for chronic inflammation are fatigue, fever, joint pain, muscle aching. And so we're getting this beginning body of knowledge that suggests there's a really close link between chronic inflammation and chronic health conditions like
Right.
type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, asthma, chronic obstructive lung disease,
Wow.
any of the autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. And now they've added neurodegenerative conditions.
Wow.
Which means it includes forms of dementia and cancer.
Yeah.
And that's the bad side of inflammation.
Yeah, that is a super evil twin. Super evil twin. So tell us, obviously our topic today, we're going to talk about cancer. Where does the name cancer come from anywhere? Where did that come from?
You know, that's a good question, and I didn't know. So I started looking around. And the research suggests that Hippocrates in 400 BC was the first person to start calling tumors by names that were similar to cancer, like carcinos and carcinoma. And we even use carcinoma today.
We do. Yeah.
He used the Greek term, which is karkinos, meaning crab. I found that interesting because if you think of cancer as metastasis, there goes the crab legs. So a few years later, I think somewhere maybe 50 BC, somewhere around that time, there was a Roman physician named Celsus, and he translated that karkinos Greek word into just plain cancer. So maybe that's where it came from. But I was thinking about this and I thought, wait a minute. The 31st largest constellation in the sky is named Cancer, which I'm sure was way before Hippocrates.
Right.
So who knows?
Who
What we
knows?
do know about cancer is that it's a disease in which specific body cells start to grow uncontrollably. Just a few at a time,
Right.
maybe the size of a little, dot on the end of a pin. But they start to grow uncontrollably. It can start anywhere in the human body. It can spread from this primary site anywhere in the human body. But cancer is not one disease.
Right.
Cancer is a minimum of 200 different types.
Wow.
That are grouped according to the type of cell from which they originated. So, for example, supposing you have the misfortune to have not realized how lethal smoking tobacco products are, and you come down with lung cancer, you're treated, but for some reason the body is not able to stay that way.
Right.
And it starts to metastasize, and all of a sudden you've got it in your brain. Well, it's not brain cancer, it's lung cancer that metastasizes.
It's just moved to your brain,
Or
correct?
it's breast cancer that's metastasized,
Right.
or it's sarcoma in one of your extremities that's metastasized. But
Right.
200 different types is a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting what we almost think of cancer as a modern, people think it's a modern, but it's not. Cancer has been around, if they were naming it at the time of Hippocrates, and of course life expectancies are so much longer now. I wonder how many people that had short lifespans in ancient times might have died from a cancer that they would have no idea was riddling throughout their body. It's not a brand new disease. It's been
No,
around.
in fact, there are tablets from Egypt that talked about ulcerative tumors and non-ulcerative tumors, and they had supposedly something that was very hot that they would put on the tumor to try to kill it. And I can only imagine how horrible that was.
Right.
But
right.
we know that likely was cancer.
Right.
So it's been around a long time.
A long time. So can you talk to us then? What's the link between chronic inflammation and cancer? What is that link?
Well, it's pretty basic. You know that each one of our cells that has a nucleus for sure contains DNA. And DNA directs the body about how to take cells that are reproducible and do it healthfully and so on and so forth, accurately. About 5% of all multiply and divide cells are going to just have a problem with them because nothing's ever perfect. But still, the DNA is in the main orchestrating that. Well, chronic inflammation causes DNA damage in the cells itself. And the DNA damage, just like the DNA damage to your skin with sun,
right,
leads to cancer. It's clearly linked with colorectal cancer, which I think is interesting. You know, they're doing research all the time about what are the linkages, and they've got a clear link with DNA damage and colorectal cancer. And then you see that people with chronic inflammatory symptoms like bowel diseases, we talked about ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, have a much increased risk of colon cancer.
Right.
So I was trying to figure out how to help people understand this. You know, thinking back to my sun exposure and skin cancers, moderate amounts of sunlight reaching your skin is wonderful because it helps the skin produce vitamin D. Okay, there we have the good twin again.
Right.
And too much sun or sunburn or exposure to tanning machines damage that DNA in the skin cells, in any skin, in any place really, but certainly we're talking about reaching, the sun reaching your skin, and set you up for skin cancer down the road. So since we have the clear link with colon cancer, the belief is as studies increase, we're going to find clear links with other types of cancers as well. So it's the damage to the DNA that triggers the abnormal cells growing.
Right. Well, so that brings us back to, how we had the fire coming across, that inflammation. So like if we understand that, just like if I want to prevent skin cancer, I can really protect myself when I'm in the sun and limit my exposure to the sun. Those are proactive things I can do to minimize my risk. So when it comes to inflammation, if I'm now aware that inflammation really increases my risk of all sorts of cancer and disease, what can I do preventatively that keeps me from that chronic inflammation?
So somebody might say, well, okay, the sun on your skin inappropriately can give you skin cancer, but your sun can't get in your body. Well, but the inflammation is in your body. The fire is raging. Right. And so internally, forget the sun for the internal cancers. Internally, that DNA damage is happening all the time.
Right.
So there's multi-level mechanisms underlying chronic inflammation, if you will.
Okay.
Different things create inflammation. We know some of them so clearly, and yet it always, I don't know if it surprises me, but maybe it doesn't surprise me as much as it makes me regretful that people didn't do the link. Because if for example, that smoking tobacco creates inflammation, and inflammation leads to chronic diseases, including cancer, tell me why you would keep smoking.
Right.
See, I have trouble with that.
Right.
So other factors are any type of alcohol, because alcohol is a complete toxin to the brain. Physical inactivity, that's very interesting because the brain has no muscles. And it seems like unless you get physical activity every day,
right,
that's really hard on the body and can lead to inflammation. I
have a watch now that buzzes at me once an hour and tells me to get up and go for a walk. And it buzzes when I've walked enough steps. Yeah, I can get stuck right here. I'm in my work. I'm at my desk and I blink and I've been here 3 hours without moving. So
I so relate to that.
Yeah.
But yes, that's what I'm trying to do. So
this is prevention for me. This little buzzer is prevention for me because I know activity is good for my brain and good for my body.
And I have a friend who got one of those and ignored the buzzer. See what I'm telling you?
Exactly.
So there's all kinds of toxins, toxicants, that are man-made things, any type of infection, unhealthy foods, and there's quite a number of those. We might have time to talk about a few of them. Psychological stress that you can't seem to manage.
Right.
And part of that is a choice, because your brain it can only do what it thinks it can do and what you want it to do. And there's lots of things you can do with psychological stress. And I'm learning that, and my life is getting more and more stress-free. When I got a call and asked if you and I could do this, we did not have very much time.
Right.
Now, 30 years ago, I might have said, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Oh dear. How am I going to fit this in? Okay, I've got psychological stress immediately. Well, I'm learning not to do that. I just said, I'm going to set aside this much time. I'm still staying on my exercise program, still getting the right amount of sleep. Arlene, you are preparing for this in this much time. And I did.
Yeah.
So then we've got obesity, which I told you was becoming a pandemic, and air pollution. And that's very sad. because there are some cities in this country that the air is so polluted from, the factories and everything else that people are trying to wear a mask just for the pollution.
Right.
So what can you do to reduce it? Well, understand the difference between genetics and epigenetics.
Okay.
Genetics is what you inherit, predispositions to, perhaps, from your biological ancestors. But that only accounts for about 30% of your health and how long you live. And people forget that. They go, oh, both my parents had diabetes. There's no hope for me. Well, there is no hope as long as that's your point of view.
Exactly.
But along comes epigenetics, which is everything that is not genetics. And that's lifestyle. It accounts for 70% of how well you are and how long you live. And it starts early. It begins during your pregnancy with your mother.
Right.
And your internal environment. Did your mother have a lot of psychological stress, for example? Was she abused? Didn't she get enough to eat? Did she have to run for her life to escape from war? All of those things impact the immune system.
Right.
So then we're not responsible for what happened to us while we were raised. But as soon as we start coming to some age of accountability, we are responsible for our choices, beginning fairly early, and then in adulthood, pretty much totally responsible for them.
Right. Right.
And I say living a high-level wellness lifestyle may be your best preventative. Yeah. So here's just 3 examples. We've talked about sleep, how important it is for you to get enough sleep for your brain.
Right.
Now we know it's not just the amount of sleep. It's how much sleep do you get before midnight?
Wow.
Because when the brain starts doing its housekeeping tasks, when you fall asleep, they seem to pick the most maybe difficult or the most urgent ones to start with, which takes a lot of energy. And that sleep before midnight, the research says that 1 hour of sleep before midnight is equal to 3 hours of sleep after midnight.
How about that?
Now, that hit me really hard, Wendy, because I do my best work.
I'm also a night owl.
I did my best work late in the evening. I've stopped that. I aim for 10 o'clock. I almost without exception, at least, am falling asleep by 10:30. And you know what? I'm waking up a little earlier and getting done okay what I would have done before. So
Right.
That's huge.
Right.
Cheerful outlook. I mean, really, a positive attitude is huge. Positivity increases energy. Negativity decreases energy.
Right.
And to do this, you need energy. Now they're talking about a green Mediterranean style meals, which is the Mediterranean style, but more fruits and vegetables and so on.
Right.
We already talked about physical exercise. You need mental exercise. You and I are getting that right now. And there is some evidence that hydrogen-rich water can lower levels of inflammation. And then I always think it's really important to talk about EQ skills, emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence helps you to manage psychological stress.
I agree.
mean, those are just some of the things we can do.
Right. And honestly, all of it links to an awareness. When I have an awareness of what is in my control and is in my power to do, then I accept responsibility for what I know and accept responsibility for the choices I make. So that all ties it together. I choose when I go to bed. I mean, some people work shift work and things like that, and you have to adjust, and that's
the way it is.
That's the way it is. But you could do other things, especially if you know you have something in your life that creates greater risk for you. Well, then we need to mitigate risk in other areas where we have more control.
Exactly, because it's the total.
It's the whole picture, not one thing.
Yeah. But you said something really, really important. I choose to do this.
Right.
As I mentioned to start with, read anything you want in the world today about tobacco and cancer. And the research is it
Overwhelming.
contributes to cancer. And
Overwhelming.
people fail to choose to get rid of a big one.
Right.
So choice is just so critical.
It is. So, okay, well, let's move to the real big question. And one of the main reasons we're here today is, does hydrogen-rich water kill cancer cells?
I don't know of any studies that report it kills cells directly. It's important to understand that it is not like taking an anti-cancer medication. But we've just spent a fair amount of time talking about chronic inflammation and the things that contribute to that, and what then chronic inflammation does as it triggers DNA changes.
Right.
Studies are coming out frequently that inflammation triggers disease, and hydrogen-rich water, I don't know what anybody prefers for the title, but I like that, hydrogen-rich water, can lower the level of inflammation.
Right.
So it's not killing cancer cells directly, but it's lowering the baseline of the inflammation that cause the DNA changes that result in cancer. Can you see how that goes?
I can see how that goes. Yeah.
I mean, it's really clear for me. I hope it's clear for others. So there was an article this year in the World Journal of Intestinal Oncology.
That's a mouthful.
I know. I had to write myself a note on that one. That reported that cancer is the third leading cause of cancer-related deaths in the world. That's huge.
That is huge.
And I also already mentioned that chronic inflammation is clearly linked with colorectal cancer.
Right.
And as we progress with the research, and its research is just really now starting to come out about hydrogen-rich water, because nobody's going to make any money with that.
Right.
You know,
right.
The drug companies make money with anti-carcinogenic medications. They don't want to worry about anything. They don't want to put money into research with something that they're not going to make a fortune with, which is too bad. However, it's starting to emerge. And I think that we're going to see clear links with other types of cancer, because in a sense, this is how I put it. Cancer only thrives in a cancer-friendly environment.
Yeah.
And a cancer-friendly environment is not one filled with inflammation. So what it's appearing to me out of this beginning research is that hydrogen-rich water can promote a cancer-unfriendly environment. And that's what we want, a cancer-unfriendly environment.
Exactly.
I know it sounds strange, but that's what, I mean, if you had your house overrun with mice, but because your kids cried every time you caught a mouse and thought it was so awful, pretty soon, I mean, you got mice everywhere, they're causing disease. That is not a healthy environment.
Right.
Well, a body that's filled with inflammation is a cancer-friendly environment, and you want to make that a cancer-unfriendly environment.
Yeah, the picture that came to my mind while you were talking is, I just imagine like in a neighborhood, if a neighborhood is run down and dark and in proximity to dark things going on, all of those things invite crime. If I want to make a difference, I can literally begin to change the whole neighborhood by lights and motion sensors and manicuring my lawn and making sure that the windows and locks and doors, and it'll change. So I'm either inviting something or I'm repelling something. And in essence, that's what we're doing with the decisions we make about what we put into our bodies, the water and the food and the habits, I'm making sure that everything is brightly lit and you know that you had no trespassing. I'm in essence saying no trespassing when I make these decisions.
You know, the problem with that, which is very sad, is that there are people who live in those kinds of conditions for whatever reason, do not have the knowledge or the resources even to do that. And that's the reason, I believe, Wendy, that when you look at the health of the type of individual by race or culture or gender or whatever, who live in areas that are not good for health,
Right.
They're not healthy.
It's true. Yeah, I believe it's Mississippi. Mississippi is the most obese state in the union, and it's a cultural situation. It's the foods that they've come to connect with community, and and so you keep repeating patterns that you know are detrimental, and we have the power to change that. I can change anything that I want to not pass forward to my children. I have the opportunity to stop and say it stops here, and we can do it differently from here forward. So anyone watching, you can make a change. However you've handled your life to this point, whatever
you can make a change,
whatever situation your health is in, you can make a change starting today. You can begin to do things that will make your life better, that will help mitigate damage that's already done and set you up for better success tomorrow.
I was talking to a woman not long ago who was, I would say, excessively, morbidly obese, unhappy with her life. But when I sat down and talked to her, practically the only thing she ate was fried foods and desserts, sweets.
Right.
And I said, well, I would cut out all fried foods. And she said, well, then the food wouldn't taste good. And I said, the food would taste different from what you are accustomed to, but you change your taste buds like every 20 days.
Right. We train them.
If you choose to have steamed okra instead of deep fried okra and tell your brain you like the taste, you can change your tastes. It's choice.
It's choice. Absolutely. So Dr. Arlene, can you tell us, we've talked about inflammation and cancer, and we talked about how if you have liver cancer and it metastasizes and goes somewhere else in your body, it's still liver cancer, even if it hits your lungs or your brain. Can you give us a little bit of the link between chronic inflammation and metastasis?
It's ugly. It's really ugly. Studies over and over again are showing that chronic inflammation promotes metastasis. Chronic inflammation changes the DNA, get the cancer started. Chronic inflammation now takes it and disseminates it from the primary site to somewhere else. Now, this is a little bit of an interesting process because in what we call metastasis, some of these cells have to leave that primary site and they try to attach to the outside of either a blood vessel or a lymph vessel. And then they move their way through the wall into the lymph or the blood. And I don't know if they're like a mosquito and have a little proboscis that's, drills a hole in there. I don't know how that happens. But then they just go along with the lymph or the blood flow and decide to stop and start a new colony right there.
Wow.
So if we can lower inflammation, not only do we prevent some of the DNA changes, but we may reduce the metastasis. Now, at least one study that I thought was fabulous. Researchers were studying patients who were being treated for colorectal cancer, because I told you there's this clear link between inflammation and colorectal cancer. And they were treating the patients with 5-fluorouracil, which is written 5-FU,
okay,
which is a widely used chemotherapy agent. And they also gave them hydrogen-rich water
Wow.
because it was recognized for its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory results. And so what do you suppose it showed compared to the control group?
I'm gonna
Well,
guess that the inflammation was lower. Just
the
a stab in the dark
combination,
there.
but hey, you do good in the dark. The combination was more effective than just the 5-FU alone. And so their concluding remarks down in the conclusion, and I wrote it out, was the administration of hydrogen-rich water with or without 5-FU may serve as a therapeutic for treating colorectal cancer.
Wow. That's
Now,
big.
I'm not saying don't take the medication, but I am saying what it's showing is whatever you're taking, if you're also taking hydrogen-rich water, you get a more effective outcome. That's huge.
That's huge. That's huge. All things being equal. So we know we've talked so much about how effective drinking hydrogen-rich water is at keeping acute inflammation from turning chronic, or for reducing, putting the flames out of chronic. So clearly as preventative, yes. So what we're honestly focusing on today is what is its benefits if we have someone that has had cancer or in a cancer treatment. So could hydrogen-rich water still help if somebody is battling with cancer or fighting cancer? That's kind of what we're looking at today. Can hydrogen-rich water be a beneficial therapeutic?
I think the studies are definitely showing that, Wendy. They're not showing, remember, that hydrogen-rich water
It's not a
can
cure,
kill,
right?
but it has a lot to do with quality of life. In fact, I read a study recently where patients were receiving radiotherapy for liver tumors,
Okay.
and that they were not receiving any medication. They're just receiving the radioactive, whatever stuff that is. And they were given hydrogen-rich water. What they found was the hydrogen-rich water did not shrink the tumor. Doesn't kill the cells.
Right.
And these people were very, very sick. But there was a marked difference in the quality of life with those individuals compared with the control group.
Yeah.
In a couple of ways. In the hydrogen-rich water group, the blood oxygen level, that's a measure of how much oxygen the red blood cells are carrying through the body.
Okay.
That definitely increased. They also found there was a major reduction in fatigue.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems that people complain about when they're having cancer therapy, is they're just exhausted.
Right.
So there may be a point where cancer is so advanced that you really can't overcome it. But apparently there may not be a point where hydrogen-rich water could not help in increasing the efficiency of the red blood cells carrying oxygen and in a reduction of fatigue. So some people say, well, it's not a cure. Well, there's no cure for life.
Right.
We're all of us are going to die, but an improved quality of life, in my brain's opinion, is a definite plus.
Definitely.
And then do whatever else you can.
Right. No, that's a definite plus. So it's marvelous for prevention. And certainly when you're in early stages or something where they've done a surgery to remove, boy, if I was at that stage, I would really be drinking hydrogen water to help fight inflammation. But at whatever stage, even if it's something that's an advanced stage, the fact that it can help me have more energy and more strength, increase that oxygen level, increase my quality of life, that would be worth it to me. That I would want to, myself or a loved one, I would want to make sure that they were having hydrogen-rich water as a therapeutic, as part of whatever other regimen they're on.
Not everything, as we've said, can be cured, but I don't drink anything but hydrogen-rich water.
Yeah.
That's all I drink all day. And if I am somewhere where I can't get it for a day, and then the next day I'm back with my machine, I totally feel different. I totally have an increase in energy.
Right.
So I think it's worth it. In the meantime, if they get serious about what they eat and drink and what they do, the immune system is pretty resilient. But some of the biggest causes of inflammation in what we eat are the vegetable oils that we fry things in, because that turns them into trans fats. The sugar and white flour and oil in all the desserts, that's just skyrockets,
Right.
Inflammation. So I look for low glycemic foods prepared in the most healthful way possible.
Right.
And, I don't know how long I'll live. I don't know whether I'm done with my skin cancers or not, but I go see the doctor every 6 months, and they put that bright light and magnifying glass on to see if anything else is emerging. But it's been several years since I've had any pop up. So you just do the best you can, be happy, enjoy life. But it's the choices.
It's the choices. Yeah. So we're just about out of time here. I wanted to, we just kind of even have wrapped up a lot of this, your own personal choice that you drink hydrogen water exclusively unless you absolutely cannot get it. And I know, like me, you also take Enterprime every day.
I do every day.
Given those building blocks, giving our body the nutrition it needs, and some of the things right at the cellular level that it's difficult to get. And I do think, though I know cancer has been around as long as there have been, humans on the planet, it certainly, in the world we live in today, we have more environmental factors creating carcinogenic atmospheres. Our food is further and further removed from natural processes, and it's ultra processed. So I do think we are at greater risk for cancer now than 1950 or 1900 or 1850.
I would guess that.
So any last words that you'd like to share? Just what you do, your own personal regimen that you've talked to us some about your sleep and your water and your food, but what if we were just to wrap this all up in a nice little neat bow that we've been talking about hydrogen rich water and cancer, how would you like to wrap that up for us?
Well, I'm doing my best to live what I call a high-level wellness lifestyle, which is why I wrote the whole program. Longevity Lifestyle Matters.
Yeah.
A lifestyle is 70% of how well and how long you live. And we've got the research.
Right.
But the piece is, what are you going to do with it?
Right.
You have a choice. And I want to prevent everything I possibly can, because as a nurse, I don't like to see people die. And I've seen a lot of people die. And a lot of that was preventable.
Yeah. So everyone, thank you. I so appreciate you joining us. As always, I learned from this lady. Even when she talks about things I know something about, I learn something new or something deeper, or she causes me to think about it in a different way and just examine things more closely with a microscope. So thank you, Dr. Arlene, just for being willing to take the time to read studies and to read research that many of us just wouldn't take the time to do or might not understand. Thank you for reading them and filtering them and kind of giving us layman's terms that we can take to help us make better choices.
Hey, it helps me while I'm at it.
Absolutely. In ophthalmology school, they taught us watch one, do one, teach one. And by the time I was teaching one, man, that was it. By the time I got to the teaching one, I really had the skill developed. So I take in everything as though I were about to teach it. And I'm just
well, it's always fun to talk to you. I love to talk to people I love to talk to people, but I especially like to talk to people who get it, who are really interested in learning how to make those kind of choices and then choose to do it. And you do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, and to everyone watching, we really do want to encourage you to make hydrogen-rich water a part of your daily regimen, as much as getting solid rest and getting great nutrition and keeping your mental health in good shape. This is such an easy, you're going to drink something anyway. Why not drink hydrogen rich water?